Hello, I'm back again. It's Henry. I'm going to attempt a sixth Flickr Street video. I wasn't 100% happy with the last one. I thought maybe I was rambling a bit and I was really philosophical about certain things. But I'm trying to just show you the context of what I'm creating and all that good stuff. So, anyway, I'm going to continue to show you some art, and I'll just talk a little bit about these characters, and then I may talk a little bit about the world itself and give you an idea for that context. And then I'll probably wrap up for this time and move on to something else next time, like a more modern, like what I'm working on and my plans ahead. Okay, so this I showed you last time. This is Convy Such and Anouk Lavage. And Convy Lee, I presented this one first. I'm kind of presenting them in the order in which they were created. But Convy Lee is the oldest character of the ones I'm going to show you. He was created 1986. But I didn't create Anouk until 2017. So, because like I said, I based her on my friend Delphin. I wouldn't say she's just like Delphin, but again, some of these weird coincidences start happening because no sooner did I pair her with Convy Lee romantically, Anouk, than her analog in real life fell in love with a bass player, just like Convy Lee is a musician. So I thought that was kind of interesting. More of that weird anticipatory karma that gives you deja vu, but it's not really deja vu because you experienced it. Anyway, enough of that later, or maybe another time. So the deal with those characters is pretty simple. Convy Lee grew up in this small town called Gossingham, which is just south of Hallmark, the city where Flickr Street is located, where the actual street called Flickr Street runs right through the middle of Hallmark, and then upward up north into the woods and into the mountains to a place called Mount Mosaic, which is one of these, the Native Americans in that area called it a sacred mountain, and there's supposed to be some scattered throughout the world. A lot of religions have noted this, and there's been like books like Mount Analog and Jodorowsky's incredible film The Holy Mountain, and then of course there's a little bit of it in Kimba the White Lion, and I kind of nicked that for Snow Leopard, along with some other elements. And of course, Snow Leopard is also a bit influenced by Iron Fist, the origin story anyway, the original origin story, not the later editions by Matt Fraction, but the original Roy Jahamas Gil Kane story, which is the one they generally went with in the Netflix series. Unfortunately, they didn't capture the flavor enough of those early Marvel premiere issues, or the series I think would have been much better. So in any case, there was a sacred mountain in the Snow Leopard story, and it was called Mount Choi Oyu, which is a real mountain, and I just kind of located it there. That this is where these people are going to find this, whatever they're going to find, this mystical whatever. It's not an entrance to another dimension like Kunlun in Iron Fist, but it does involve some power. It does involve some kind of mystical. Yeah, I never really got very deeply into it, and now it's kind of a moot issue because I guess I'll go ahead and reveal this now, and because who knows how long it would be before it mattered to anyone enough to be a mystery. But so I know a lot of people are via me and the Flickr Street pages are starting to like and follow the Snow Leopard page again, which is pretty much just on an indefinite hold as far as I'm not planning on posting anything else there or whatever. But I do have the entire uncut story there and some notes and some things about the history of how it developed with me and Shanti and Alberto and Alex Rivera and others. So Lou Disharoon is one. He became the artist, the second artist on it, but he didn't stay very long with me on it. But I was happy to have him for whatever time. He's a great friend and creator. So anyway, yeah, Snow Leopard. I did tie into the Flicker Street universe, I guess you could say. It got absorbed, just like a lot of things, just about almost everything I have done has been. Not everything, but not my Defenders pitch or its pastiche called Conclaves. So there's a couple of characters in Conclaves that may pop up in Flicker Street in some kind of altered form or another. So uh, Snow Leopard has been absorbed into that. Originally, I was going to add her to a prominent family tree of Asian characters that I had. Excuse me, my hat's like a weird shape. And so, but then I thought it was clashing too much with a character I'd already created called Key, Kee, and um, of course, Snow Leopard's name is Zhang Qi. That's Zhang, family name, so it comes first. Qi, Qi, and of course that ties in with chi and energy. Um, but anyway, there's a character I had created many years ago when I was a young child. Um, yeah, maybe 10. I don't know. It was during the era where I was hanging out with Thomas. One of the earliest characters I created to fit into the Dynamite Comics world, which was really kind of worth a damn, was a character called Fireshade. One word. I'll be talking about him quite a bit in the future, even though he's never been a front burner character. He has an important arc that threads through other major character storylines, and that's reemerged in the current Ellinger story. Because there's a street named after him in Hallmark called Key Street, Kee, and a lot of stuff happens on Key Street, and it's similar to a major street that I live off of now, and that's kind of been a major street since I was a kid here, and it runs out to one of the highways. So, and it goes from Charlotte, where I live, into a small town called Pineville. I live about a mile to 2 miles from the city limits of Charlotte, and then where Pineville begins, their city limits. And my day job is technically in Pineville, even though it's kind of considered Charlotte, but it's considered South Charlotte. But it's pretty damn south because it's heading to Pineville and it's heading towards South Carolina, which I'm not terribly far from either. So enough geographical nonsense. Basically, um, the other character is also a member of the Zhang family, Zhang. So I had another Zhang Qi, spelled differently, uh, and that is Fireshade. And at first I was like, well, I'll make Fireshade her cousin, her uncle. There's an indeterminate time period that the Snow Leopard story takes place in. It could take place in the I don't know, in the 1940s or 50s. It could take place in the 60s, 70s. It could be recent. Of course, there's 10 years that it spans where she grows up, much like in Iron Fist's story. But it's not because the Kunlun portal only opens every 10 years. It's just that's where I arrived at. Okay, now she's ready to go and take her revenge. Unfortunately, that's when you find out. Well, anyway, I won't give the spoiler away in case any of y'all do track down the original 16-page story with extra art. It's on my DeviantArt page and it's on the Snow Leopard page. And I believe it's probably even in my albums on Facebook, my profile. So there's plenty of ways to see it and read it. And, let me know what you think whenever you check it out. It's a different style artistically and a little bit dramatically than Flicker Street, but it's encompassed within Flicker Street. So what I've been laboriously getting at here for the last 5 minutes is that um, within the world of Flicker Street, Snow Leopard is fictional, just like it is in our world. It is a fictional story. Snow Leopard, aka Zhao is a fictional character in that world, and Kira, her telepathically linked Snow Leopard, is also um, a fictional character. So they exist in manga. Yes, in Japanese comic books in the world of Flicker Street. And the writer who began working on these comic books, he he named his character after the real Zhang Qi, who he'd encountered when they were both rather young, and he created his own Zhang family and whatever. And at some point, he was privy to the idea, the secret or whatever. I'm not sure at this point if it was ever a real secret identity or anything, but that he was also called Fireshade, and that he was, essentially one of the good guys, a protagonist rather than antagonist. It seems like most of the characters in this my story are antagonists to my good guys, to the people who are kind of trying to do well and change the world for the better, and kind of failing or at least succeeding only by half measures and stopgap measures, and really survival is becoming more and more their primary goal, and kind of is reflecting in real life now, that scenario, sadly. But anyway, so that's the deal with that. So I'll track all the way back a little bit. So um, basically, Convoli Such I created in a fertile period for myself, creatively, 1986, and he was part of a mystery storyline called Transient, and Transient was kind of a being, sort of like a being made of sonic energy, not exactly like Claw and Black Panther, but he wouldn't look anything like that. He wouldn't be solid. He'd be phasing in and out, and he used a special guitar, an alien guitar, in order to project and control the energy and teleport with it, etc. But you couldn't really make out any of his features, so there was a mystery as who Transient is, and of course, there's not a mystery anymore if you look at some of my artwork. And not one I'm going to show today, I don't think, but some that are on my page, because I have the character that really is Transient. But Convoli Such was the suspect, and he had made some enemies among this group called the Aggregate, which is kind of they're sort of the closest I have to a super team of characters that, in this reality, they functioned between 1964 and 1981, and then they officially cracked up and went completely underground. They were already semi-underground, but they went completely underground to these places called compounds, where they basically hid out and tried to combat the corruption that was happening all over the world, and that was ruining everyone's lives, including them and their families' lives. And we're talking basically corporate corruption and um, wars, hostility, destabilizations of government. Those are on the big scale, and of course, a lot of it involved the alien technology that had been incorporated into our culture over a few decades. By that time, about 3 decades, and also um, a lot magic, the dark magics from one of the two races that were clashing in the beginning, which I'll talk about, probably at the very end of this. But they're called the Pisceans, and their home planet is one of the planets, third from the sun, actually, from the star Pisces. So that's where they are located in corporeal or temporal space. But as we'll see, their science and their magic and alchemy have reached a point where they're more extra dimensional in their travels, and they're able to, they've traded technology with the race they've had the soft civil war with, called the Omega Cetans, or the Omegans, and they live on the third planet from Omega Ceti 1, which is also a real star. I have no idea if anyone lives out there or not. But anyway, those two have been at it for millennia, maybe hundreds of millennia. It's hard to say, since each of them developed the ability to fly in space, actually extraterrestrial space, deep space, and that's how they encountered each other. But they have made a number of truces on different worlds and created cultures there that have embodied facets of both of their technologies. So that's how they came to be on Earth. That place is called Exodesia, and it is located hidden in Africa, Um, Not like Wakanda in Black Panther, but more like some of the places, the lost races and islands and things of the past, like Atlantis and Mu and Lemuria, that were mythical, but maybe existed. Who knows? But also ones like them called Agartha, which was in Africa. When supposedly all the continents were a giant supercontinent called Pangea. I hope I'm saying that right after all these years, or Pangea. I don't know, but anyway, of course, some of you'll know that Pangea and Agartha are two Miles Davis albums. But he was mining that Afrofuturism slash retro lost civilization African as the source of all life kind of vibe sonically. Of course, he had no lyrics in his music, but those themes are on his albums. And the last major album that came out by him, a live one before he retired for 5 solid years, was called Dark Magus, which is very appropriate. He was the Dark Magus, and he was through this very unconventional music during that period. This heavy electric jazz funk music was kind of conjuring these spirits and these ideas. And his album titles and album art, especially by Matty Clarwine, conveyed that. So so I've gone ahead and jumped ahead and told you everything about the beginning, more or less. I mean, not the tiny details, but that's essentially the backdrop of which we're dealing with. And I had always had these ideas between these two races. I mean, the Omegans were a race that I was writing about in the 1980s. Pisceans came later. I had some amphibious looking humanoid characters, but I never pegged down who they were, why they were like that. Were they from Earth, not from Earth? Well, they're not from Earth unless by chance they were born on Earth. One or two were. But yeah, they're some Pisceans. So the Omegans look basically like us. Few different features here and there, but uh, they basically look like Earth humans, more or less. The Pisceans are amphibious, so they're kind of a mammal, but they're also kind of a reptilian. They stand erect. They are humanoid, and they're kind of your classic, what people would call fishmen, or characters like the Gill Man, creature from the Black Lagoon, or Triton of the Inhumans. They don't really look like either of them, though they do have scales and they do have some green in their skin. So um, definitely those were inspirations. But I came up with this character, or well, he came to me when I was maybe a junior or senior in high school, called Anaximander. I'd heard that name and I thought, wow. And I started drawing a picture, and the picture is now lost, unfortunately. But Anaximander, and he was dressed in human guise, but human clothing, but he had that appearance. He had the Piscean appearance now, as I've defined it. So he was the first Piscean, as far as I was concerned, even though I didn't determine his origins until many years later. Definitively, I didn't define them until 2014, when I began writing these backstory treatments. So there's a film playing in the background, by the way. So essentially, that's kind of the origin. Everything seems like it has gone through more or less the same, gone down more or less the same way as it did in our reality on the Flickr Street, Earth. And because most people are unaware of these things, and they have consigned signifiers of these past events and beings to legend and mythology and religion. So, this is like saying this is kind of in that universe. This is the secret behind the myths, the legends, the fictional stories, the science fiction, the fantasy, the horror. And of course, I love that conceit. Obviously, I've talked about it a bit here, the analogical mirror with Philip A. Farmer, and the found footage and found documents and all that kind of stuff. All of that is in Flickr Street, believe me. And I wrote a couple of found documents recently, uh, and they were interesting. They weren't automatic writing, but I had to do some editing on them, but they flowed pretty well with what I wanted to do. So my mind is in that stream right now, and I hope it remains there, well, indefinitely, until I put all this out into the world on a bigger scale. Um, I'll show you some more pictures, and then we'll kind of talk about a couple of related things, uh, influences, inspirations, and then since I've already killed the suspense with the Great Soft Conquest, as I called it, between the Omegans and the Pisceans, I'm going to go ahead and just not go into that at the end. This is Curio. Curio is a character who uh, co-created with a friend named Derek, and Derek had this idea, um, and he kind of based the character on himself, more or less. He was a metalhead with really long blonde hair, and he had scars on his forehead from a childhood fire, I believe, or some kind of accident that caused a fire. Uh, and he was a cool guy. We were good buddies from maybe junior high to a couple of years after high school, especially my senior year and that summer between my senior year and when I began working at my first job, which was kind of taking all my time from then on. But um, anyway, Derek had this idea and he had not refined it. And so I physically designed the character based on his descriptions and kind of went in my own direction, which is kind of how you see here. So, now 30 years later, you could almost say his makeup here is almost like the death metal, black metal corpse paint. And I am trying to kind of evoke that, but it's really originally from the glam period and the Alice Cooper and Kiss, etc. Uh, Sensational Alex Harvey band, all those guys that wore the heavy makeup like that and the white and black contrast. So Curio basically wears this makeup a lot, and especially on stage. And that and his sash that he wears up here hide the scars that he had from a horrible thing that happened to him. It's nothing like what happened to Derek. It's much more far out. And I kind of wrote that story out in 1987, and that's the story I've referred to before of four friends who were like in high school and they get involved in the occult and something insane happens. But it was a lot more predictable back then what I wrote. I mean, back then it was like they summon a creature and something blows up and blah blah blah. There is some burning in this, obviously, and some death, but it's unleashed by something much stranger than just summoning some evil demon. That's really not what happens at all. It has kind of to do with tantric sex magic and the dark effects of it. So we'll get into that another time. But repercussions of that story now, I mean, large chunks of Ellinger are sequels to that story. By the time I established that Curio was one of the four, and that he had been believed dead after this spell gone awry, and then comes back to Hallmark 2 years later as Curio, not his original self, not his real birth name, but now he's like kind of a up and coming rock star. And of course, it's like 1987 in the story, 87 to 88. So you're talking about a peak of glam metal, pop metal, the LA excess lifestyle, all of this being romanticized on MTV and in the media and through the albums. And then, of course, attacked by organizations like the PMRC and who attempted to censor this kind of music and this kind of vibe, this kind of lifestyle. And then you had a great documentary, The Decline of Western Civilization, Part 2 by Penelope Spheris, and that kind of encapsulates it. My older friend Scott, he not older than me, but I mean older than now. He actually went out there, left Charlotte area, and went out there to kind of try to break it, and at the end of the '80s, early '90s, maybe with another friend of mine I know, and they didn't really make it, and they came back. A couple of bands that went out there, one made a few waves, but then disappeared. It was hard, from what I understand, and Scott gave me a lot of cool information that I've used with Curio, actually. Curio lived that life. So when our man here was traumatized and semi-amnesiac and spirited away, he ended up in Los Angeles, and heavy metal was still in his blood, so to speak, and rock and that whole rebellious attitude and Satanism and just things he was fascinated with along those lines. So as Curio, that became his whole image, and that's of course, once again, the reason for this. I love this tattoo. I don't know how well you can see it really. It's an upside down pentagram with a lightning bolt through the middle. I didn't create the symbol. I extrapolated it from a real one. This one is a heavy satanic one that you see a lot of people wearing these days. Probably can't see it that well. Um, but yeah, I mean, he's got scars all over his body from the fire. He's got, piercings and tattoos, and not a whole lot of piercings, but and a few tattoos that symbolize where he's coming from. And he wears the jewelry, and he wears a lot of the glam outfits of the '80s, kind of Vince Neil-ish, the like very early Vince Neil. Well, not the super makeup one, but your typical blonde guy with the little scarf around his neck and a vest and no shirt on underneath and the cutout gloves and 20 sashes tied to his mic stand like Aerosmith, who'd been around for ages when they made their comeback. It was in that era, and they adopted that style and took it completely over the top. So maybe I should be comparing some of Curio's guys not only to Alice Cooper and black metal, but also to Steven Tyler. I don't know. He wasn't really a direct influence, but he was a good visual symbol of that era and that strain of music and lifestyle. So Curio is kind of a partier, and he's been in my story nonstop since then. I lost touch with Derek. Derek told me do whatever you want with this story, with this character. I like what you've come up with. He tried to write some with me, and he was overwhelmed with his own personal life and issues, and did not go into this vein of staying a creative person. As far as I know, he gave up the bass guitar and stopped writing poetry and stopped writing comics of his own. But I don't know because I lost track with him almost completely in 1992. Was the last time I believe I saw him. So I may look him up one of these days. We were on good terms the last time we spoke. Um, so if I find him, I definitely will say, hey, here's Curio. I made $1 million off him. Would you like maybe 500,000? No, I'm kidding. I mean, I really did the bulk of what you see as Curio. I mean, I did the entire physical design. I created his real legal name. Um, I didn't come up with the word Curio. Derek did. However, Curio, a lot of my characters start with the names and then I work out from there. I love names, um, but there was a curio shop in my story that belonged to the Bradcrofts, who were a British wealthy family that had kind of settled or lit in Hallmark in the mid 1950s for various reasons, and they were actually two brothers who were mages, and they magi, and they were they were um, they were on the side of the angels, so to speak. The only problem is one of the brothers was undead. The ritual had given them their powers, killed him, but also resurrected him as this kind of one toehold in the world of living, one into death. And so he saw things very differently, and he tended to stay in the shadows. He called himself Nocturno. And my other, his brother, his twin brother, fraternal twin brother, um, named Carrie Bradcroft. Carrie, he didn't have a long, big sobriquet like Curio or Nocturno or anything dramatic, but he was called the Shadow Baron after he ascended with his powers. He was a baronet in real life in England. But I don't really refer to him as Shadow Baron much, even though I love that name. And I guess it's as good a time as any to say that all of the characters, names, concepts, story material, et cetera, and all related imagery and uh, details are copyright 2020 by George Henry Smathers Jr., which was my original legal name. So anyway, yeah, so that's Curio. So like I said, he ties in, and actually in Ellinger, I've come full circle with the Curio shop. Now his daughter runs he owns it now, and his daughter runs the Curio shop. This is a character that only became popular with me or with anyone else in the last year. Her name is Shine Raven, sometimes known as Shine Hawkmore, and occasionally was known as Shine Shockner. So she is an undead. I don't have a tremendous amount of these kind of characters in my story, but eventually knowing my tastes, that a zombie had to make their way into it, and it had to have its own raison d'etre, its own reason for existing within the mythology or the cosmology of that I'd already established, the larger continuity, the infrastructure. So Shine began in 1988 and 87, and a story took place in 1988, which was kind of the end of the 1987 story arc that went from 86 to 88. But in 1988, there's her boyfriend is Blake Hawkmore, one of the guys who was in the Four and who made the pact. Like Curio was one of them, and Blake was believed dead though, and he comes back and he resumes his life, and he breaks up with his old girlfriend, and he's kind of aloof, kind of distant. He gets back into metal and prog rock and all kinds of various things, and hangs out, in parking lots and car jacks and different things for fun. But it's not like before. It's not like before. And his friends that he had, like Jeb and Jespeth, they notice he's different, and no one seems to be able to reach him. But Shine Shockner is this kind of very southern fried girl, also from Gossingham, and um, she loves him, and he has a kind of sexual fixation on her, and so they become lovers. But he begins serving a darker power as a result of this kind of cord he's linked into because of the thread that ties our four guys together. It's like a darkness that's calling all of them, and some have walked away from it and managed to keep it at bay. Some have embraced it. Blake at that time embraced it, and it led to his destruction and Shine's death. So that was that. Many years later, like 2017, that key year in my life, I had the idea to return Blake Hawkmore to the story because I had based him on a friend of mine, and I'd lost touch with my friend for a number of years, and we're occasionally in touch now. But he did come see me at one point in Charlotte, and it really made me think. I was fascinated by the guy he was now, and um, how he seemed passionate about the things from the past, but also kind of distant because he had gotten married, had two kids, and a family of his own. So he still liked some of the same music. He is a musician. At the same time, he wasn't on that exact track that he was back then, and I wasn't either. But I think I remember it a little more vividly than he does, and that could just be my crazy brain, the way it works with this kind of hyper detailed trivia mnemonic kind of thing going on. So um, Blake came back. I didn't really invite him back, but he returned, and he was very different. And this time he wore like a suit, and he'd cut his hair. He wasn't really short, but I showed you a picture last time. You may or may not remember, but still blonde, and it was starting to recede just a little up here, but not too bad. And long bangs, and he was a cool character. When I say cool in this case, he was like ice, and he ran the Zed Foundation for Clive and Dharma, and also worked directly under the CEO of it, called Marguerite, who was Clive's first wife, um, Marguerite Devereaux. And so that obviously makes him a major character right away. So a lot of people in Hallmark don't even realize it's not like he, sent everyone telegrams or texts saying, "Hey, I'm back." He just quietly began working there, and stayed under their umbrella, and really didn't contact any of his surviving family, didn't really contact any of his surviving former friends. But gradually he becomes known about, and his agenda is very inscrutable. Even to me, I'm kind of letting him reveal himself to me. Now, he has died twice now, and because of this powerful pact that these guys, uh, became bound by, um, he is able to transcend death a few times, but each time he's going to be more degraded. he's going to be further from the person he was. He's going to be more zombie-like in certain of his behaviors and needs and drives. So this is his third life now. So each of these guys get 4 as a result of the 4 in the pact. So Curio's on his second, but and he's doing a lot better than Blake. But Blake wasn't doing real good when he got resurrected before, but that was because a villain called Urias, who was an archpriest of Exodesia, he wanted to exploit the spell that they had cast prior to that, and he wanted Blake under his control as an end to that. And he had a lot of enemies. Urias is one of the major villains in the past of my stories, but he's been destroyed well before where I'm at now. So anyway, yeah. So Blake is back, and amazingly, then his girlfriend is back, but she suffered a bit more death than he has. She did die in 1988, but she's on further along, and also she didn't have the pact of the spell to protect her, so she's kind of full tilt zombie now, as you can kind of see, and she's got the crazy eyes here. This is one of my most beloved pictures by myself and fans. They really love this character. They immediately hook with her. She's on my telephone. She's a sweet, gorgeous zombie, if such a thing can exist. And she carries a little doll called Stella, which she believes is her and Blake's child. And, she's not in her right mind. She's not completely human, but she is kind. She does have cognitive abilities. And in a concession to the post-Romero zombie mythos, she does crave human flesh, and Blake supplies that to her. And she lives in a very secret, insulated room somewhere in the Zedtown Foundation skyscraper. So that's a story that will play out as a subplot throughout Ellinger, and then she'll take a more a crucial role in the next arc. So here are 2 other characters. I did this one. I think I finished this one in late 2018, perhaps. So this is they're both playing music. They're on stage. They're in a band. It's hard to see with this reflection here on the frame. This guy is called Flint Water, and this girl is called Aspasia Feltz. So Flint is a black guitar player, and another one of these weird synchronicities is that I named him in about 1991 or 2, and didn't really begin using him a lot until about 95. Since then, he's been a somewhat major character. Flint becomes very corrupted in the current storyline. He's been a decent guy, but he's not so much anymore. But anyway, 25 years ago, I didn't know, or 20 years, whatever, before it happened, I didn't know there was going to be this horrible poisoning of the water in Flint, Michigan. So Flint Water has a totally different connotation now. It's not deliberate. I'm not trying to say, well, okay, he's like a black guy who's, holding the banner for the Flint water problem. But if you choose to see that as subtext, you can. I see it as another long, long series of never-ending synchronicities that I tend to ascribe to the kind of mystical or alchemical nature of creating these kind of stories. So anyway, Flint, he's a great guitar player. His older half brother, who is white, he's Jareth Lloyd Langton. I did a picture of him. I'll show you next time. Jareth turned out to be the being called Transient, so he has that power. Flint is troubled. He's insecure about his sexuality. He decides that him and Aspasia, they've been in this band together for like 20 years almost, and he suddenly finds himself wooing her, and she has finally given up on the love of her life, Derek, and who is a very major character. I'll get into him another time. But Derek basically founded their band and wrote a lot of their songs they still play. And Derek and Aspasia's love for each other, which went unrequited sexually for quite some time. It was kind of this, ideal kind of wow love kind of thing. At least for Derek, I mean, Aspasia wanted, she wanted to get laid, and that wasn't her motive. But I mean, she loved the man. She wanted to make love with him. He was very evasive. Derek is on the autistic spectrum. He's got a lot of issues he's working through, and he continues to be a major character. He's also known as Snowman, which is a disguise that he has invoked many times, and he's put Snowman aside for long periods of time. He's gotten in trouble with the law, but he's kind of been extricated from that for very complex reasons. So, in Rellinger, he's actually working a regular retail job, and he's starting to become engaged with humanity again. And he's not in trouble. I mean, the government knows what he's doing, they're keeping tabs on him at all moments. But Snowman could rise at the right time. And Snowman is a vigilante who uh, gets offended by very odd things that are in our culture and makes grand statements, rather violent ones, actually, sometimes against them. So he's a difficult to describe character. I'll describe him another time. So, anyway, when Aspasia thinks they're done for good, even though Derek is back in society after a number of years of not being so, she asks him to rejoin the band, and he's no, and he's like, no, I can't have this thing with you. I've changed too much. You'll always be my love, and all this. There's tons of romance in Flicker Street. I'm just going to warn you right now. Weaned on soap operas and Marvel Comics, how could there not be, really? Um, so she turns to Flint and sees him in a little different light after all these years, and he's totally manipulating her, and he's also manipulating his ex-girlfriend Juliana. And Flint works for Ellinger, and he's a spy. He's an agent on the street. He's kind of collecting information. He's kind of doing things for their cause, but really, Ellinger does not know that Flint is really doing all this for his own power, his own benefit. Through Ellinger's help, he unlocks the same mutagenic power that Jareth has, which he had never evidenced before, but it was in his genome. And so he also gains a power similar to Transient. Pretty powerful, but not as powerful. Less controlled, though, because his music is a bit more frantic. He's not as great a lead player as his brother, and he's often suffered under that shadow. So it even extends to him being a transient formed being. Wow. So we could go on and on forever for this, but as you can tell, I'm very enthused about these characters. So Flint's going to do some dirty things and then become kind of a fugitive of sorts and will not end up with Aspasia. As to what will happen to her, who knows? We'll see. She'll tell me. All right, so here's the next character, I guess, in chronological order that I made up. I actually made up the name and the premise of him being an ally of one of my protagonists back in high school. His name was Deacon. And then in the early 90s, as I became obsessed with blaxploitation, I worked an enormous amount of that kind of vibe into my story. And now I have, many black characters, just like I have many Asian characters, female characters, gay characters, a few transgender characters. And as I've grown, so has my story grown. And as society has grown, it has grown, American society, but not as much as I'd like it to. But anyway, this is Deacon Thrush, and I don't know if you can tell how much of a movie buff whoever watching is, but he is rather patterned after the look of Ron O'Neal as Youngblood Priest in the film Superfly, which is my favorite blaxploitation film and one of my favorite top 5 films of all time. Deacon is, for all intents and purposes, has a similar personality. I would liken using Ron O'Neal as the template for Deacon. I've done this with a few characters. It's kind of how Paul Gulacy would do on Master of Kung Fu in the 70s. Like, for instance, Larner is based on Marlon Brando's circa Last Tango in Paris look and personality. And he's got the hack stabber guy, the cab driver, who's based on Groucho Marx. Um, I'm forgetting a ton of them, but I mean, those are two that leap out at me as being like, oh, that's so and so, but it's really not. But that's another level of pastiche writing, and that's the kind that I am comfortable with still doing because it still fits snugly into the Flickr Street, the oververse, so to speak, the Uberverse. A few years after Deacon came to be, I was, enchanted with reggae, and now I'm obsessed with it. And this character came to mind. I thought, what if there was a Rasta superhero? Well, he's not exactly a superhero, but he also is someone who takes the law into his own hands. His name is Ross Freeman, or Ross Free. It's not his real name, but that's his handle that he does his music under, and of course becomes his kind of identity. This picture took me forever to finish with all his dreadlocks, but I love his design. I love his personality. He's mentally not altogether there himself, but he's a pretty intelligent and very driven guy. You don't want to mess with him. And he also has gotten into trouble with the law because, I mean, after all, he's destroyed a few people with this mystic axe he's got, which he stole from the corpse of one of these. Well, anyway, long story. But this axe he used for his vengeance. It's kind of like the Cull story. With this axe I rule. So his is like, with this axe I avenge, man. And that's kind of what his deal is. And he went on that spree and he got in trouble with the law. And again, certain people in high places granted him amnesty. And so again, he's walking about the streets of Hallmark and he is touring intermittently, playing his music. But they're aware that he's a threat to their way of life, and he has a strong connection to Ellinger and Ellinger's origin, which I'll reveal over time, and that gave me a good stimulus to bring Ross Free back into the main line of the saga. I'd kind of, he'd kind of been benched as a supporting character in Austerity, but now he's a major character again. So that is that wonderful guy. And to be honest, I have a couple of others, but I think I best save them for next time. I've run quite a bit over and I achieved what I'd wanted to achieve. I think this turned out far better than the last installment. I could be wrong. Please let me know, and thank you for watching. You'll have a few more of these in coming days, weeks, whatever, and I hope you will enjoy learning about and entering the world of Flickr Street with me. I'm excited to share it with the world, and thank you, as always, my friends. Take